So we've gotten some idea of how you measure lengths. Now let's look into how you measure volume. Volume means how much space does something take up. If you have an easy object, by that I mean a regular shaped object, जिस पे आप formula इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं, so then that becomes a little bit, easier to do. So for example, you have this rectangular object. You know that the volume of a cuboid is given by length into breadth into height. So, like this would be the breadth, that would be the length, and this would be the, or not, this would be the height, and like this over here would be the breadth. So you would measure these three things using a ruler, and then you would multiply them up and you'd have the volume. Similarly, if you have a cylinder, what you could do is perhaps use vernier calipers to figure out what the diameter of the cylinder is from here to here. And then you can measure this length using a ruler, and then you would use the formula which is pi r square height, where r is the radius, and since you know the diameter, you would halve that to find the radius and put that in the formula. अब उसी तरीके से अगर आपके पास एक sphere है, you could use a micrometer screw gauge to actually measure this diameter, and then half of the diameter is the radius, and then 4/3 pi r cube is the formula for the volume of a regular sphere. So let's just do a few quick examples of this in action, right? So for example, if we talk about this, length into breadth into height gives us the volume of this cuboid, this rectangularoid. So this is going to end up being, well, what's the length? The length is going to be 10, so that's 10. And then the breadth is going to be 7. And then the height is going to be 5. So that's going to become 10 times 7 is 70, and 70 times 5 is 350. So that's 350. And you can see that the units are inches. So this is going to become 350 inches squared. Ab ye dekhen, not squared, cubed. We're talking about volume after all. So ab hum aate hain on this next example. What would you do? Well, you have this formula. You would just put the numbers in. So as you can see, the diameter, not the radius, the diameter is 6. So radius is equals to d over 2, which is going to equal 6 over 2, which is going to equal 3. That's your radius. So then your volume is going to equal pi, which is approximately 3.14, into the radius squared, which is going to be 9, and into the height, which is 10. And you would punch that into your calculator and you would have your answer. And similarly, over here, you can see that the diameter is 7. So the radius is going to be half of the diameter, which makes it 3.5. And then you would plug all those numbers into this formula and you have your answer. Now suppose you have, for example, the volume of a liquid. Well, liquids take up the shape of any container they have. And, it's not always easy to get a shape you can use a formula on. So what we do is we use, for example, a measuring cylinder. उसमें हम क्या करते हैं कि आपके पास पहले से readings दी हुई होती हैं. For example, this is in milliliters. So you would pour the liquid in and then you would just measure up. So, you can see you would start from here, it's at 0, obviously, and you go all the way till here. Now, with measuring cylinders, it is very important, and they're going to definitely test you this in your practical exams, your alternative to practical exams, and sometimes in your MCQs. तो कभी कभार आपके पास हमेशा पानी जो है ना या ऐसे होगा या आपका पानी जो है वो ऐसे होगा at the top. This is called a meniscus. So this is called a downwards facing meniscus. This is called an upwards facing meniscus. So if you have a downwards facing meniscus, your eye level, जहां आप reading लेंगे, ये आपकी आंख है, तो you're going to measure the reading like this. Like ये जो इसका bottom edge है, यहाँ से आप reading measure करेंगे. You're not going to measure this, not here. You are going to measure this reading. This is going to be the right reading, this one over here. Lekin if you have an upwards facing meniscus, then what you need to do is measure this reading that is over here. You would not measure this reading. So that is something to be careful of when you measure with liquids. Well, now what if you have some sort of really strange object like this? You can't pour it and you can't, measure out the volume using rulers and some sort of standard formula. So then what you do is it's called the displacement method. So for example, you take a beaker and you put pani inside it. तो फिर आप पहले से मालूम करते हैं कि इसमें कितना पानी है. For example, this is like 10 milliliters. ये आपने measure कर लिया by looking at the readings on the beaker. तो फिर आप क्या करते हैं कि इस पत्थर को अंदर डालते हैं. You put the stone in and then you're going to see that the water level is going to rise. Maybe the water level rises to maybe 30 milliliters. Well, that water level rose because you put the stone in. And so what is the volume of the stone? That's going to be given by 30 milliliters, subtract 10 milliliters, and so the volume of the stone is going to be, for example, 20 milliliters. Now, there are certain kinds of quantities that you want to measure, but you can't measure directly using an instrument. So, for example, you want to measure the density of something. So, density is a derived quantity, and it's also one that you can't just directly measure very easily. So, you have to measure two separate things first. So, for example, as we'll discover later, the formula for density is mass over volume. Now, how do you figure out what mass is? Mass is something you can figure out by, suppose you want to measure the density of, I don't know, you have an object that looks like this. तो अब आप क्या करेंगे कि सबसे पहले उस object को आप बिठाएंगे on a weighing scale. That will tell you how many kg that object is. It will tell you the mass. So for example, when you put this, you discover that the mass is like 10 kg. So then how would you figure out the volume of this object? Well, you would put the object inside using the displacement method. You would put the object inside the beaker and then see how the volume changes and measure the change in volume, and that would give you the volume of the object. Let's suppose you do that and your volume comes to maybe 10 centimeter cube. Then what's your density? You would just plug in the numbers. You would do is equals to 10 kg divided by 10 centimeter cube, and you would end up with 1 kg per centimeter cube as your density. So as I shared a bit of a story earlier in an earlier module. SI units are standard international units that the world over recognizes. The SI unit for length is the meter, and if you जब हम बात करते हैं दूसरे units के, for example we talk about the centimeter or we talk about the kilometer, these are actually based on just the meter. So when we say a kilometer, what we really mean is that a kilometer is made up of 1,000 meters. That means that 1 kilometer is equals to 1,000 meters. जब हम centimeter की बात करते हैं, what does that mean? A centimeter means that you have a unit that is actually 1/100th the size of a meter. That means it would require 100 centimeters to give you 1 meter. So sometimes it's convenient to measure units in centimeters, sometimes it's convenient to measure it in kilometers. If you are measuring the distance from Lahore to Islamabad, it would be a big pain to do that within millimeters or centimeters. However, if you are measuring the length of an ant, chances are you may want to do that in millimeters, not kilometers. So here is a chart that helps you keep track of how you convert from one to the other, and we will get into that in the past papers as well. अब जिस तरीके से हमने बात की है कि length can have various units. It can have centimeters, it can have kilometers. Just like that, when you have derived units like density, you can mix and match them as well. So for example, you can have grams per centimeter cube, you can have grams per meter cube, you can have kg per meter cube, kg per decimeter cube, kg per centimeter cube. It goes on and on and on. Any combination that is considered most helpful to have.